Hello and welcome to the Future Food Finance Podcast. My name is John Reynolds, the host. This week we've got a fabulous podcast. We're talking about cultivated meat, which continues to be a hot topic across food technology. And we've got two fabulous guests. We are joined by Carlotte Lucas, who's a Senior Corporate Engagement Manager at the Good Food Institute, and Petra Hanga, who's the Chief Scientific Officer at the UK cultivated meat startup Quest Meat. So it's an overview of the market in 2023. And I guess one of the key things is there's been two approvals in the US for cultivated meat products. So that's kind of the headline of the podcast. And the guests talk about what the ramifications will be in light of these approvals. We also discuss investment in the sector this year. Also, some of the sectors basically still got questions about the whether it's ever going to be scaled. So we talk about some of these scientific challenges and whether they can be surmounted. And we also delve deep into Quest Meat to see how they're progressing and talk about various other things in the sector in 2023. So podcast is coming up. And please remember to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and also check into FFF every week, where there's a roundup of the performance, some of the news stories of the publicly listed companies in this sector. Hello and welcome to the Future Food Finance Podcast. My name is John Reynolds, the host. This week we're talking about cultivated meat, which continues to be a hot topic in food technology. I'm sure most people listening know what cultivated meat is, but for the uninitiated, this is meat that's developed from animal cells and grown with the help of nutrients in giant bioreactors. So advocates say it's a game changer, bringing massive environmental benefits such as helping fight climate change and economic benefits. But critics would argue that the potentially sky-high costs mean the industry can't be scaled. Now, we've got two fantastic guests. We're joined by Carlotte Lucas, the Senior Corporate Engagement Manager at the Good Food Institute, the alternative protein think tank, and Petra Hanga, who's Chief Scientific Officer at the UK cultivated meat startup Quest Meat. So thanks. I'm really pleased you're joining me. Can we just get brief intros? Can we just start with you, Petra? Just a brief overview of your career today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Petra Hanga. I actually wear several hats. So I am the Chief Scientific Officer and the co-founder of Quest Meat. And I can tell you a little bit about Quest a bit later on as well, if John allows me, of course. But I'm also an academic at University College London. And actually my involvement with Quest and actually becoming a founder of Quest kind of led a little bit from my research, which is very much focused on developing manufacturing processes at scale, which is a very hot topic. And I'm sure John will touch on this as well, for cells for cultivated meat production. So I am very much an engineer by training, and I had to learn everything related to cells and biology and all of that. And all of these things are very, very important when it comes to making products like cultivated meat.
Yep, that's great. Very concise. And Carlotta?
Yes, John. Hi, all. Lovely to be here with you. My name is Carlotte Lucas. I work at the Good Food Institute Europe. We are an international nonprofit think tank working to accelerate the alternative protein transition, including cultivated meat. I specifically engage with large food manufacturers, suppliers, investors, helping them understand what's happening in the space, the trends, the opportunities, how they can get involved. My background is in business, organizational transformation consultant in the past, and now taking that passion to the food system, which I think we can all agree requires some transformation as well.
Right. Equally, that's fantastic. So there's loads to get through. I think a good starting point is, there's been some big regulatory news this year, so which is a good starting point. So last month we had two US startups, Upside Foods and Good Meat, have been given approval in the US to start selling cultivated chicken. And there was a news this week in Europe that Israeli startup Elif Farms has made the first application to sell cultivated meat in Europe. So, I mean, when I read this story about the US approvals, I thought, this is big news, potential game changer. I mean, Carlotte, does this kind of, how big is this? I mean, is this going to open up the floodgates for a raft of approvals, not just in the US or Europe, or should we treat it with caution, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't say will open the floodgates immediately, but I definitely think it's a historic moment in our food system, and it's going to raise the interest in cultivated meat a lot, as well as probably the investment in this sector. I think it's going to force governments around the world to really look at this sector and think, hey, what can cultivated meat actually add and help us in creating the sustainable food system that we all want? As you mentioned, very quickly off the back of the FDA announcement, Aloe Farms has indeed applied for regulatory approval in Switzerland, which is extremely exciting. I think it is interesting that we're seeing the first European approval in Switzerland and not at the Brussels level. And I think we can contribute that a little bit to the fact that at the EU level, we're getting a little bit of mixed messages. There's countries like the Netherlands, where we're seeing extremely kind of supportive governments. And then there's countries like Italy, where they're trying to ban cultivated meat. And the result of that is we're also hearing that some cultivated meat startups are now trying to go abroad with their first products. So, I think what this means is, we need to be able to develop a more coherent strategy here at the EU level to really be able to take advantage of cultivated meat.
Yeah, I did see that. That was quite strange, that Italy announcement. That's kind of an outlier, isn't it? That's all they're talking about, kind of preserving the tradition of food. So that, I guess Italy might be kind of an anomaly, maybe. I wouldn't have thought many countries will do that, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, times will tell. Italy is a big, powerful country, so definitely worth listening to kind of the direction that they're going to. But it was, once again, I think remains at the EU level, we need to be more consistent in supporting companies.
Okay, so Petra, Quest Meat, when you get wind of an announcement like this, for a startup like you, this must give you kind of fresh impetus, and it's kind of, it's obviously good news, and you kind of think there's a finish line in sight then, I guess.
I mean, myself personally, because I'm kind of tackling this from both angles of research and Quest Meat's entrepreneurial. I see these milestones almost like the start towards the validation, perhaps. I don't know if that's necessarily the right word, but the validation that we can actually make cultivated meat, and we can, this is achievable. It's not something that is science fiction, because I think there are still quite a few questions around how feasible it is. But seeing these 3 products now that are approved and they're available to be sold in, Singapore and US, and actually the announcement with Aloe Farms as well, I think that came in as a really important milestone and really important announcement. And I think this validation as well kind of translates in a way in the frequency that we start seeing these milestones building. So if you think about the first milestone was back in December 2020 with that approval in Singapore.
Yeah.
Actually, for the past 6 months or so, 8 months since November, since the first product in the US got the green light from safety, then there's been almost like a cascade of milestones. Yeah, perhaps smaller ones, but I think these are all kind of building towards that validation. And I think that there was another one a couple of weeks ago with the Dutch cabinet approving cultivated tastings as well. So, even though in itself is not an actual approval, but I think it builds towards that. It's very, very exciting. And us at Quest, we're super excited about this because this again kind of validates that what we are doing is the right thing. And we're working towards trying to help the industry and build the industry through our products.
Okay, that's fantastic. Just the last question on the Upside Foods and Good Meat. One thing I did notice about the announcement, and I've kind of noticed this, is that I think they both said that initially their cultivated products will be sold in restaurants, and they talk a lot about working with kind of Michelin-starred chefs to kind of improve the taste. I've noticed a few kind of cultivated meat companies talking about that. I just wondered, it seems in a way bizarre because you've got this revolutionary technology way of making meat, and then the kind of these makers are saying, but we need to kind of improve the taste as well. Am I reading it wrong? Am I reading too much into that? Does it not kind of undermine the technology when they say we need to improve it at the for humans to taste? Maybe Carlotta.
Yeah, John, I think I read that more as whenever you're introducing a new food item to consumers, it's important that they are able to experience it in the way it's intended to and kind of experience it in a trusted setting. And that is something that Michelin star chefs can provide. They can ensure these products are cooked in the right way, shown in the right way, so that from the get-go, consumers have the right experience. We've seen that a lot with plant-based products as well, that they first go into food service before retail, so consumers can get kind of used to them. So I think it's a smart step. It's also a step that's being taken because we're not able to actually produce cultivated meat at the scale yet to bring it into retail. So I think it's just the logical first step.
Okay, okay, that seems fair enough. So, Petra, can we just talk a bit about, just give us an overview of Quest Meat, where you're based in, I think, Birmingham in the UK. Can you just talk about what stage you're at the moment then?
Yeah, of course. So Quest Meat was funded in 2021 in August, so we haven't been around for very long, but I think the work that we've done over this year and a half has been quite significant. So our mission is to support the cultivated meat industry by developing ingredients that are food grade, low cost, sustainable, and can help the industry bypass some of the current challenges. These current challenges are basically all kind of focused around the scaling up of the manufacturing process, reducing the cost, and of course sustainability of the ingredients that are used in producing these products. So in terms of where we currently are, I think we're quite excited to say that we have sold our first product to national and also international clients. And these were our Quest bovine cell lines. We've been developing these pretty much since the day that we became operational, and we were looking at isolating cells from different cattle breeds. So we're now working on expanding these offerings of cell lines to include other species, with pig cells being commercialized in the next couple of months. Perhaps it's worth saying, for those of you that are not really very technical, but in order to make these products, you basically need to start somewhere. And where you start is with the cell lines that you use to make the final cultivated meat product. Because at the end of the day, if you think about meat, is just a mixture of cells, muscle cells and fat cells and some other cell types in there. So what we're trying to do at Quest is we're trying to make those initial materials in the form of cell lines available to companies that want to produce cultivated meat, because at the moment these are quite difficult to source, and you require very specialized knowledge in how to isolate them directly from tissue, and also connections to slaughterhouses or to farms. So it's quite a complex product. But if you can bypass all of that and start with the cells, then that makes your life a bit easier. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of our first product. We're also looking at getting cells from other species of interest, like lamb, fish, and also water buffalo, because why not? But I think the main purpose of Quest, as I said, is focusing on ingredients that, on our proprietary ingredients that are low cost and food grade, and also sustainable. So we're working on developing almost I would say two classes of products that utilize our proprietary ingredient. And these are in the form of tools that are used in the manufacturing process. So, for example, these cells generally need something to attach to when you put them in those very large fermenters. So we're working on processing our ingredients into the shape of a fit-for-purpose attachment substrate, because what is commercially available now is all pretty much made out of plastics. So obviously you can't have those type of materials in the process of producing your foods, because obviously there are very evident issues with that. And then we're also looking at other products that support the growth of those cells, like media formulation. So that broth that has all the nutrients. The problem, and actually I was quite surprised to find out about this, but the cultivated meat products that have been approved so far, including the ones in the US and Singapore, they still use serum in their formulation. Yeah. And serum is derived from animals. It's almost like a byproduct of animal farming. But obviously there's a lot of issues with serum, including cost, which translates into the very high cost of these products, but then other safety risks associated with it. So what we are trying at Quest is to replace the serum with our ingredient and other components that are food grade and sustainable.
Okay. Yeah. Right, that's very informative, and you've covered lots of ground that we want to touch on. I think one of the things, just talk a bit about the science. For one, I've not got a brilliant grasp of it, but one of the areas of debate which you've touched on there is whether the animal cells need to be grown in pharma-grade bioreactors. Mm-hmm. And you're saying that they don't need to be pharma-grade. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to make a food, right? Cultivated meat is a food. But I think when this started, the techniques and the knowledge almost, or at least the basic knowledge, was, let's just say, imported from applications like tissue engineering or, healthcare based applications. So in healthcare, obviously you're trying to develop therapies. So it's very important what kind of grades and the purity of those components that go in the process. But because this is a food, if the intent is to achieve that cost parity or get as close to cost parity with traditional meat, which I think for the long term, that would be the goal, then what you put in the process has to be low cost, because with all the engineering strategies, you can't really bring the cost down sufficiently if you're using things that are very expensive at the start.
Okay, bring Carlotte in there. Do you concur with what Petra said then about the vats? These bioreactors don't need to be pharma grade, and she also talked about the growth media, which is kind of another about the fetal bovine serum, which is obviously another controversial topic. Can you talk a bit about that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely concur with Petra in everything she said. Ultimately, we are creating a food product, and we're leveraging a lot of technologies and techniques from other industries, including pharma. But we're now looking how we can reapply them. And so the parameters under which we're working are different. And the price point at which we need to get to is also different. And that is one of the biggest challenges that cultivated meat faces. How can we scale up but develop a product that is at the same price as conventional meat? And so developing kind of input ingredients that at a low cost is key. And I think, that's one of the most exciting things we're seeing in the sector today. If we looked 5 or 6 years ago at the cultivated meat companies that were out there were only a few of them. So they really had to do everything from developing the cell lines to the cell culture media, building the bioreactors to the actual end product development. But now, over the past 3 or 4 years, we've seen a plethora of B2B startups like Quest pop up that are really honing in on a couple of these underlying technological challenges, and then be able to provide those solutions to some of the cultivated meat companies that are developing the end product. And I think that this type of transition is what's really starting to accelerate progress in this space.
Okay. So, and just on the FBS, so I think Petra mentioned this. So this is, and people have an issue with this because it's extracted from the cow fetus after slaughtering a pregnant cow. But so just, I mean, are the cultivated companies, are many of them still using FBS, or are most of them switched to alternative? And is that alternative, I guess the alternatives are currently a lot more expensive. Carlotta?
Yeah. I think every single cultivated meat company has the intention to switch away from FBS for a number of reasons, including the ones that you already mentioned. But it is indeed a process. And there's kind of startups and companies that are identifying what are potential replacements, and how do we develop those at a low cost, like Quest is doing. So we will see that transition. It's FBS was part of the kind of the start of this industry, but it's definitely not going to be there at the end of it.
Okay, that's great. That's very informative. So, I mean, Future Food Finance, we're obviously, our audience is investors. I looked at the 2022 Good Food Institute kind of review of the year on Cultivated, and you had some investment figures which were interesting. I think they showed that investment in the industry between 2022 and 2021 had gone down from $1.3 billion to $900 billion. Admittedly, investment generally was down across alternative proteins. There's obviously economic factors to, part of the reason is down to economic factors. Petra, what investment has Quest had today? And I mean, what do you think the general, I know you're not an investment expert, but I mean, will you be going to market to looking for new investment over the next 12 months?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we're still quite early stage. We're still at the seed stage. But actually, we've been quite successful in securing government funding, which it's still under embargo, so I can't really give you a lot of details on that. There will be an announcement, hopefully in the next couple of weeks to a month. So from that point of view, we've been really great at getting that. We're still looking for private investment, and we're still reaching out to loads of investors and talking to loads of investors. So yeah.
I mean, how do investors? I mean, are investors bullish? Do they kind of get cultivated, or are they more interested in plant-based? Or I mean, what's their general?
So generally, we have, because actually we've. I would say we're really, really happy to be able to access GFI resources, because GFI has been absolutely fantastic in establishing all these databases, including databases of investors that have an interest in the alternative protein space. So what we have been doing is accessing that database and identifying some of the investors and talking to them. So generally, the investors that we talked to were familiar with the concept of cultivated meat, or at least alternative proteins in larger context. So yeah, we haven't really had a problem in from that point of view.
Okay, I don't know. Carlotta, are you Carlotta? She may have dropped out the conversation. Can you hear us, Carlotta? Carlotta has. I think we've lost. Unfortunately, we've lost connection. But maybe she will come back. But hopefully. But I mean, there has been, as Carlotta mentioned before, it does seem as though the governments are kind of more buying into this. I think, as you mentioned, Petra, the Dutch government have made a big investment in backing cultivated startups, and the mood music generally from the big economies like US and China is positive. So, and I guess with these regulatory approvals, I mean, although there is still concern and skepticism whether the industry can still be scaled, there's a lot to be optimistic about for a company like Quest.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, even in the UK, perhaps in the UK, there could be more done, but I think the government generally recognizes that alternative proteins are very important for future food security and, also to achieve the net zero strategy, which UK has, and it's actually very ambitious. And I think at least in the past year or so, there has been quite a very good amount of funding getting through targeting startups that are working in the alternative protein space. So there was very recently, I think it was around 16 million that were put in through an Innovate UK and UKRI joint call on applications from startups that would target novel low emission foods. So that was obviously particularly targeting cultivated meat startups. There was also, and I think this is a big milestone for the UK in particular. So very recently, through government funding, a cellular agriculture manufacturing hub, CARMA, was funded, and that was worth £12 million. So this will start this year in October. It is led by University of Bath. Professor Janel is there in collaboration with some of the other universities, like including UCL. I am involved in this with both of my hats. So in the sense that as an academic at UCL, but also with my Quest hat on, as Quest is one of the industrial partners on this manufacturing hub. And this will, again, look at the scalability of the manufacturing processes, use engineering as almost as a tool to develop improvements in that process, to bring the cost down, to make it more sustainable. So basically targeting all of those challenges that we were talking about.
Okay, I'm afraid Carlotte, I can't seem to get her back. Right, but we've managed to kind of roll on the two of us. The other thing I was going to ask you, I know you're still at an early stage, but I remember speaking to another UK cultivated meat company, IV Farms, and I think they had one of their issues was, and I'm not really an expert, was with the kind of potential regulatory process in the UK, the FSA novel food system. And I think they were saying that the issue, and I spoke to a few companies about this, is when you make an application, there's no kind of feedback. So they were calling for a more collegiate approach between the company that makes their application and the regulator. They were saying that you can make an application and for months or if not years, you don't get any feedback. So you're kind of left in limbo. And I think that may be an issue. I don't know if is that something you know about or?
Actually, it doesn't really surprise me that you say this because these are such new products and the regulatory pathway had to be adapted to this. Yeah. So cultivated meat goes down the pathway of novel foods for regulatory approval in the UK. My understanding is that there are two parts to the process. Which lasts around, 8 to 12 months or something like that. And it is basically looking at the safety of the product. So what goes in there, what the composition is, what happens, what would happen if the meat would be ingested and what happens in, when it's broken down into the different components. Is any of them toxic? So once that step is passed, then it goes into more detailed evaluation of how it is manufactured and all of that, and the facilities as well. But I think the process, so I don't know exactly the details of this, but in a way it kind of reminds me of what we used to see in the cell therapy space, cell and gene therapy space. 15 years ago, or maybe it's been 20 years ago, when it was such a new field. It was the same with the regulatory process. It took a bit of time until They understood what the potential risks are with this. I know very recently there was a call out from FSA for an advisory board that would focus specifically on the alternative proteins, and they were hiring experts from different areas. So I think things are moving, perhaps not quite as fast as in other countries, other places like Singapore, but I think they are moving, which is it's a step forward, isn't it?
Okay, right. I think we're going to have to wrap. Just last couple of questions. You've ploughed on manfully on your own here. It's a shame we've lost Carlotte, and I can't get it back. So, I mean, I think one thing that the Good Food Institute would say was maybe a lot of the products which first come to market will be, instead of pure play cultivated products, will be hybrids. So part cultivated, part plant-based. And I guess the reasons this is cheaper to make, and the customers might want some of the benefits of the plant-based, like fiber. Do you think that's a fair assumption of where things are heading?
I think so, because producing cells, it's such a complex task. And actually, even if you think about the products that are available now in the market, if you go and look at sausages, let's say, none of them contain 100% meat, right? They contain, I don't know, a 10 to 20% meat, perhaps, and then everything else is other things to improve that taste.
Yeah.
So I think there will be something similar with the cultivated meat products. And I think these are things that will have to be decided as well through the regulatory process and the approval of labels, etc. What is acceptable in terms of how much of the cultivated meat should be in the final product that will be commercialized. So I think that, there will probably be some variation on that depending on the country. It will be interesting to see.
Right, Petra, you've been very eloquent and explained. It's great to hear about Quest, and thanks, Carlotte, who unfortunately lost connection about 3/4 of the way through. But thanks very much for joining us, and that's been the Future Food Finance podcast.